Welcome to the Happy Disruptors podcast. If you're a creative thinker with an unconventional approach to your industry, you just might be a happy disruptor. Join your friends at the Great Outdoors Foundation for honest conversations about tackling critical issues like conservation with an uncritical disposition. If you like to smile and get things done, this is the podcast for you.
Hello and welcome to the Happy Disruptors podcast. I'm Katie and I'm so excited to hear from our guest today. Before we jump in though, I do just want to say a huge thank you to this episode's sponsor, Snyder and Associates. We're so grateful to have the team over at Snyder as a partner with the Happy Disruptors podcast. So with that, I will turn it over to Chris Lee, who wears a lot of different hats, but all are applicable to today's conversation. So Chris, so glad to have you here. Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. So I'm Chris Lee. My main job is I'm the executive director at Des Moines County Conservation down in Burlington. Born and raised there in southeast corner of Iowa, grew up on the Mississippi River. The outdoors and conservation was my life, and I knew fairly early on that was what I was going to make a career out of. As I got into it and got more in depth into becoming a leader in the line of conservation, I decided that I wanted to do something to give back to the leadership community, I guess, specifically within the world of parks and conservation. And so the other hats that I wear now is I call myself an organizational ecologist. It's totally a made-up term, but it fits. Basically, I take concepts from ecology and I apply them to how to make your organization better, how to improve your leadership, how to improve team dynamics, and just make organizations more effective. Specifically, my heart is in the parks and conservation space, but I do leadership consulting and keynotes and workshops and things like that across a lot of different industries.
Yeah, I love that. Well, one of the things that I feel like was probably an instant connection for us is your Parks and Restoration podcast. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how that came to be? I remember a story you sharing when we were first talking about doing this episode together, just about this exchange of leadership from one generation to another and how that is really exemplified in sort of the senior leadership among county conservation boards right now. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so Parks and Restoration podcast started out as a podcast called Outdoor Executive Dad because it kind of defined everything I was as an outdoors person and an executive of my organization and then a father. And it was brought about, I was seeing a lot of generational turnover within the world of county conservation. And so I'd see these directors, like 30, 40 years of service under their belt, and they were retiring because a lot of industries, just the way time is, there's a lot of generational turnover happening across a lot of industries and certainly in the conservation world. And so those that I knew, I would just reach out to them and say, hey, would you just sit down with me over Zoom or a phone call or something like that and just have a chat, because there's this institutional knowledge that was leaving our industry. And I'm like, man, if I could capture that, And so a lot of them said, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And I got, half a dozen of these recorded. And I'm like, what am I going to do with these, And I'm a big consumer of podcasts. And I thought, man, it's awful selfish to just hold this knowledge to myself. And I thought, I'm going to start a podcast and I'm going to use these recordings along with other things that I just had an interest in of like, how do I talk to people and tell those stories across our industry? And so that was kind of what brought it on, and it was kind of a on again, off again thing. But then here about 6 months ago, I decided that if I'm going to do this, I need to do it. And so I reached out to my best friend. He's Jeremy Yost. He's on the natural resources area or natural areas management team out in Pottawatomie County. And we used to work together in Des Moines County. I said, would you co-host this thing with me? It's a lot of work, just, getting guests and stuff. I said, we share a lot of the same kind of leadership bend. I said, maybe we can just talk about some of the concepts that, we text about or we talk about when we go hunting together, fishing together. And he's like, oh, that sounds like a great time. And so we've been doing that for the last 6 or 7 months, I suppose. And then we've been reaching out and getting some guests going too. And when we do that, we invite this community that we're building, this next level leadership community. So if you go to parksandrestoration.com, there's, you give us your name and email.
Yeah.
But rather than just signing up for a newsletter, that is this community that we're trying to build around parks and conservation professionals. And so we'll send an email out and say, hey, we're having so-and-so on the show. Join us. It's going to be a live Zoom, and you can ask questions. And so we interviewed a best-selling author. She wrote a book about the value of disconnecting and going out in nature. So she's a consultant out in Idaho, and she takes executive leaders out on the trail, takes their cell phone away, takes all their communication devices away, and they go on these trail hikes. And she's found that that's a great way to unlock their best business ideas. And so we had her on the show, and we interviewed her. We've got several others in the works. And so that's kind of how that came. But it all started with, how do I just capture this information and just get that, these leaders that have been in it for decades, and they've seen the ups and the downs and the highs and the lows, and just some of the knowledge that they shared was fantastic. And so there's a lot of those episodes early in the show, and then it's kind of morphed into more just kind of leadership concepts now.
Yeah, I love that. Tell the listeners one more time where they can find your library of information and sign up for that.
Yeah, parksandrestoration.com.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, I think it's so interesting because that's right at the intersection of sort of our world here at the Happy Disruptors podcast too. We have obviously a pretty significant emphasis on conservation and water quality, and love to have guests who are experts in those areas. But then we also, just as a nonprofit entity, we have so many fantastic partners who are operating in different sectors, and really anybody who's kind of a creative thinker who can use analogies, or I love the symbolism of ecology and organizational ecology. So glad to have you here today, Chris. And we thought what better topic to discuss is this concept of organizational ecology and some of the leadership, maybe like golden nuggets that we can take from that.
Yeah.
So you had an epiphany that led you to this parallel between natural ecology and organizational ecology. Can you just tell listeners a little bit more about that and maybe how that's developed just based on your background?
Yeah. So Jeremy and I get kind of in depth into it in the episode, the Parks and Restoration podcast episode called The Origins of Organizational Ecology. And so the quick version of it, if I can say anything quickly, I guess. I tend to be wordy, but the quick version of it was I had risen up through the ranks in county conservation. So I started out as a natural resource manager, moved up to operations supervisor, and then moved into the director role in 2013. And I had one of those times where, things weren't going the way I necessarily wanted them. And so the couple staff that I was having some issues with, and I got together, and and I'm just like come on, it's one of those come to Jesus meetings, that leaders, managers have sometimes. And in the course of our conversation, one of them, I basically said, what's going on here? What is the problem? Why isn't this working right? And I don't remember what the issues were that we were dealing with at the time. And one of them spoke up and said, Chris, you can be intimidating. Now, I'm 150 pounds soaking wet. I am not an intimidating kind of person. I have never, the word intimidating has never been in my vocabulary as a way to describe myself. And it darn sure is not a word that I would use to describe quality leadership. In fact, if you were to ask me to come up with a list of words that disqualify you from being a good leader, intimidating, leading from a place of fear, that would be pretty high on the list. And the epiphany didn't strike at the time. It was only afterwards, upon reflection, that I got thinking, I don't want to be that person. I refuse to be that person. And so now I'm having this crisis, this internal crisis of I am the leader. I'm the executive director. I am the leader. Yeah. This is how I'm being described. And, he said you can be. He didn't say I was all the time. So that helped, right? Yeah. But I found myself, we had this little wildlife area back behind where my office was at the time. And sometimes I'd go back there just to think. Sometimes you just got to step away from the computer and go back there and think. And I remember very clearly, I laid down on this picnic table in this shelter house. I'm looking up at the rafters of this shelter house, and I'm like, maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I should just go back to being a field guy. Maybe I should just go back to being an ecologist. That's my training. I was never trained in leadership. You go to college. I graduated from Iowa State University with a degree in animal ecology. I know how to get more wildlife on the landscape. That was the start of my career, was a wildlife biologist.
Right.
I'm like, maybe I should just go back to doing that. Like, that's, then I don't have to deal with people, right?
Yeah. Whole different beast.
And that's when the epiphany struck of what if, I asked myself, what if the concepts that make a good wildlife manager, this idea that you don't browbeat and administer wildlife into doing what you want wildlife to do. You change conditions. So I had started my career as a private lands wildlife biologist, and in order to get, at the time I was working in Northeast Missouri, and the focus was on bobwhite quail. And in order to get more bobwhite quail on a particular piece of property, working with a landowner or something, we would change the habitat. And you'd change the conditions, right? You'd create the habitat for quail to thrive, and then you would get the quail and they would thrive. And that's just a core component. It's a universal force of nature, right? And so I thought, what if that applies to the human world too? What if that applies to our organizations?
Yeah.
What if instead of focusing on the hows and the whats and do it Chris's way, and here's another policy, and here's another staff memo, and here's another, do this, do that, task list, project list, strategic plan, whatever. What if I, as the leader, turned my focus to how do I create the best place to work?
Yeah.
And when I did that, everything changed.
Absolutely.
It wasn't overnight, but it changed everything. And now every year we do our, we look back, and across the board, I have staff, I have volunteers, I have interns saying what an incredible place to work is. And, do we get it right all the time? No. But that's organizational ecology in a nutshell.
Well, and I think the really cool part about that, and I'm drawing some assumptions as someone who has no training in ecology, but a key word there is time, right? So you didn't see a shift immediately, and it took repetition, it took consistency to see the change that you were hoping, that desired outcome. So, Chris, I took a little bit of creative liberty in maybe giving a title to some of these additional nuggets, but I'm just really excited because I think many of our listeners are going to be able to apply these concepts in whatever role they are in. I think most people find themselves in a similar position where, there's not necessarily a leadership class that you take when you're in, your undergraduate or graduate education, certainly not when you're in high school. You go out into the workforce, and at some point you have opportunities to rise up the ranks, and so I think these lessons on leadership are so helpful, and to hear it from just this practical standpoint. So without further ado, we have 5 concepts that I want to dig into today, and I'm just going to tee you up because I think you will have all the material here. So first, creating conditions to thrive. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, and I want to preface all of this with, the stuff that I teach and the stuff we talk about on the Parks and Restoration podcast, we call it leadership through the lens of ecology. But I need to draw a distinction between leadership and management. So anyone can be a leader. You don't have to hold the title. You don't have to be the executive director or the CEO or the top dog in any organization. You can be a leader even if you're frontline rank and file. Leadership is something that you do. And so anyone can apply these concepts. And so you talk about creating the conditions. So, in wildlife management, you're going to create the conditions for wildlife to thrive, and then they do. So let's apply this to your organization. What is it going to take for the people in your organization to thrive? And I've built this entire framework around this. I call it the 5 Ps of a thriving organization. And it's people, purpose, perspective that makes the canopy of this tree. And then you got proactive and process. Proactive makes the trunk, and processes the roots, like these processes that you put in place. So if we bring those together, a perfect example is, are you carving out time to have one-on-one time with your employees or with the people around you? Like I said, you don't have to be the top person, but generally I'm looking at this for someone who's in some sort of leadership position via title. So are you taking the time to have chats with the people around you, with people that you work with people that you lead, and understanding them as a person, understanding their perspective, because we all see the world through a different lens.
Right.
Right? Your experiences are different from my experiences. My experiences are different from everyone that works with me. And if I'm not taking the time to see the world through their lens and understanding their struggles, their dreams, their hopes, what it is they're dealing with at home, and I often had this early in my leadership journey, my mindset was, you leave your stuff at home.
Yeah.
You know, like when you show up to work, we got a job to do. All that baggage that you're carrying, leave it at the door. That's not how humans work.
Right.
You know, like this concept of work-life balance, like there's two sides of the ledger, and there's no overlap in those. That's not how life works.
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
know? I mean, I bet everyone listening to this right now has had work follow them home. And everyone listening to this has had something at home follow them to work. So we got to understand that. And if we're going to be leaders in our organizations, the better we understand that, the better off we're going to be. Someone comes to work and you know, and I've got all sorts of stories of times where this has gone right and wrong, but you know, somebody comes to work and they're not really firing on all cylinders. You know, the management strategy is to look at that from a performance perspective. The organizational ecology strategy is, am I seeing the world through their lens?
Yeah.
Just like if I was going to manage lands for a particular species of wildlife, I need to know what it's like being that wildlife. You know, I often use the analogy of a quail is like 8 inches tall. I would take landowners, we would go lay down in the habitat that we were managing and you know, say, look, if you look at it down here, suddenly you realize that this little bird can't navigate through all this thick thatch layer.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with people.
Definitely.
And so it's just, it's those little things that we do to ask ourselves, am I putting people first? Am I seeing the world through their perspective? And am I being proactive at implementing some sort of strategy to make sure that I'm doing that consistently?
Yeah, absolutely. And what is going to be an environment where one person can thrive may not be the same for another. Absolutely. And, you know, that's the fun juggling act of leaders, and especially those who are in management. But it's so critical to look at it from, I love that exercise of physically looking at it from their perspective. Yeah. That's super helpful.
Yeah. So a perfect example, so an actual practical example of how that has played out in my organization is, so we did this, there's this thing called The 6 Types of Working Genius by Patrick Lencioni. Is a book I love. I had everybody in my organization do the Working Genius assessment. And what it did is it gave me language around this concept of energy. And we can talk about that here in a minute. But what I found was we would have these staff meetings, like we'd have monthly staff meetings, and you know, we were whiteboarding out, okay, what's our strategy for the month, and what are our goals, and all this stuff. And I love a whiteboard session. Like I'm an idea guy. Like,
yeah,
like,
you're in the right company. Absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
You give me a marker and a whiteboard, like heck yeah. Right? Most of the people on my team loathe that. Really? They want to say, all right, you tell us what you want done, and we're going to go knock it out the park. And so once I understood this, I'm like, staff meetings are gone. This out. Yeah. We got rid of the monthly staff meeting. And so now it's just me and the managers, the field manager and the environmental education manager. We meet once a month to make sure that you know, these are the goals and the priorities for the month, and then that gets translated out to the team, and then the team executes. And it frees them up, reduces some meeting load, frees them up to go out and do what they're best suited to do, what they get the most energy out of doing.
I love that. Yeah. And you don't know if you don't ask the question, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's so important. Okay, second concept, interconnectivity versus modernity.
Yeah. So one of the key concepts in this, so if you look at the 5 P's of thriving organization and you take people, so imagine a triangle, so an equilateral triangle, right? Yeah. So at the top point is people, and the bottom left point is perspective. The line between them is connection. And when I teach this in my programs or my talks, I look at humans through an evolutionary history process, and I ask the question, how did we make it this far as a species? Like, if you look at us as individuals, we're not exactly suited to survive in the wild.
Right, exactly.
Right? You know, like I got to believe 3 million years ago, if there was, some alien race that looked at the Earth and was like, all right, Vegas is taking bets on what species is going to come to dominate the planet. Early humans was not going to be top on that list.
Yeah, that's
right?
fair.
And yet we did. Mm-hmm. And so it begs the question, how did we do it? Well, it's because of all the species that have ever existed, we are better at working together than any of them, hands down. Because of that, we have this innate need for connection. We have to know that we are part of a tribe, and that the people around us have our backs, and that we are counted on to have theirs. That's what got us this far. Mm-hmm. Yet we have this modern world that we've all got social media in our pockets. We got, we're the most connected society that's ever been, 6 degrees of separation, right? And yet in 2024, I believe it was, the Surgeon General said we are in the midst of a loneliness epidemic.
Yeah.
We are lonelier now than we have been in recorded history. So talk about a dichotomy, right, or a paradox. And so applying that to our organizations, how do we build connection with each other? Now, do we have to share each other's deepest, darkest secrets? Absolutely not.
Right. But
do we have to create the type of environment where everyone working there feels like the people around them have their back? Mm-hmm. They don't have to get along. They don't have to be best friends. They don't have to be drinking buddies. But they have to feel like their tribe is there.
Yeah.
And that when they walk into that room or that office or that workplace, they know that, if this was 100,000 years ago and they stepped out of that cave and came face to face with the saber-toothed tiger, that somebody behind them is going to be like, all right, let's go. Yeah. I got you.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Because we're not against saber-toothed tigers anymore, but we are up against all of the stuff that the modern world throws at us.
Yeah, that's so true.
And we cannot navigate that alone. Mm-hmm. So that's what we've got to cultivate in our organizations.
Yeah, most definitely. And identifying those, to your point, we're not necessarily facing physical threats, though I'm sure in some cases that still remains depending on what your profession is. But, what are those challenges that we're tackling together? How do we come and look at this and tackle it together? Right. Yeah. I think that's so critical, and having this mutual understanding of trust and respect. It seems like those are 2 ingredients that are just like really critical for any form of connection.
Absolutely. And so a practical example that those of us in the world of parks and conservation will face is budgets. Yeah. And for most of us, my guess is that budgets aren't necessarily improving. And even if they are, if you're one of the lucky ones and you work in an organization that has a nice, strong budget, chances are you'd like more. And so that can put a lot of stress on your team, especially if like your frontline employees don't feel like they have any control over that. Yeah. But yet they're the ones that are going to be affected most by it. Yeah. And so that comes to a both a mindset and this thing I talk about, like proactive. When you walk into the room after that budget meeting and maybe it didn't quite go so well, how are you communicating as a leader? Are you walking in there and saying, "Ooh, yeah, well, this is going to suck," Or are you walking in there and saying, "All right, we're up against some tough times, but we're going to get through this. And here's what I can do to move this thing forward." Yeah. And one of the things I'm not going to do is expect all of you to navigate this by yourself. We're going to sit down and we're going to share ideas. And I'm going to carve out time to sit down with every one of you to hear your concerns and make sure that I understand how this is affecting you directly. It really just comes down to that.
Yeah. And I feel like this is probably going to bleed into the next concept a little bit. You touched on it earlier, but energy that fuels us. Yeah. What is that concept?
So every ecosystem is built on energy, right? So so my co-host Jeremy works out in the Luss Hills of Iowa, and he spends a lot of time cutting trees out of the Luss Hills that have taken it over and releasing the remnant native prairie that still exists there. Never been plowed because of the topography and stuff, and it's been lost to trees. What are they actually doing when they remove those trees? They're allowing sunlight to reach that soil surface and energize the plants that are laying in there dormant. Same thing applies to humans. We all have some form of energy that ignites us. Only we have different words for it. We call it passion or purpose, or the Japanese call it ikigai, or we've got all these terms, fulfillment, right? So in terms of organizational ecology, how do you then take, so again, going back to the framework, we got people up at the top of the triangle, and you got purpose down at the bottom right point of the triangle. The line between those is fulfillment. So how can I connect the people around me to what they find fulfillment in, whether it's the type of work that they do, or it's just what they like to do outside of work? And so for those of you that are watching the video, I'm wearing a hat right now, and it just says TGR. That stands for Tanner Gebhardt Racing. Tanner Gebhardt is an employee of mine. He races sprint cars.
Amazing.
That's his thing.
Yeah.
Like this guy lives to race. And so as a leader, I know this, and I know that races often are on Fridays and Saturday nights. And so I can build a system around that to make sure that he has the ability to connect to what he is truly passionate about.
Yeah.
And so, we're going to build our schedule around that race schedule. So come summertime, when race season hits, you're going to work 410s, or we know that you're going to take some Fridays off when you have a Friday night race or something like that. The work still has to get done, but there's no reason that we can't just be creative about building a schedule around that.
Right.
A lot of the people in this world, at least in the world of conservation, they like to hunt and fish. And so we're going to build around that to, I've got one guy that works for me that just lives for deer hunting. Like, we'll count the seconds until deer season opens. And so, you're darn right that we're going to make sure that, we know he's taken the first couple weeks in November, there's going to be time taken off because he's going to be out hunting the rut. And it's making sure that we're connecting our people to that, and that work does not get in the way of what you're truly passionate about. Because if it does, it's going to be de-energizing. And pretty soon, you're going to be looking for somewhere else to go. Yeah. And oftentimes we get this feeling of like something's off, and it really is just, it's that energy thing. And and so we start looking at maybe a different job or something like that, even though what we really need to do is connect to that which we love. And then so if we talk about doing this at work, so like the story I talked about earlier of removing the monthly staff meetings, those were incredibly de-energizing for the team. Yeah. And so we took those off our plate, and trying to free the team up to do what they find most energy in. And most of my team, going back to the 6 types of working genius, they either have the genius of enablement or tenacity. So they love working together and a job well done. So I want to free them up to do the work as much as possible and not bog them down with administration and meetings.
Right. Well, and them knowing that you have that consideration of them and that awareness, I would imagine also then contributes to the connection that you're seeking to build, which is
absolutely
so critical. Okay, 4th concept, ecosystem disturbance.
Yeah. So going back to managing lands for a particular species of wildlife, oftentimes I would talk to landowners and be like, well, all right, we need to do some prescribed fire on this little spot here or something. And they'd be like, you want me to do what?
Right.
Like I'm trying to create habitat here, not destroy it.
Yeah.
But as ecologists or conservationists, like, we know that disturbance it's just a universal force of nature. The prairies that dominated Iowa were maintained with fire. And oftentimes the oak hickory forests that were native to Iowa were maintained by fire. And we have conservation areas in Des Moines County where that fire has been removed, and we're seeing it change now. We're seeing that species structure change. And just like I mentioned earlier, out in the Les Hills, they removed fire from the landscape, and the cedars moved in, and the trees took over, and it choked out the native prairie. So disturbance in an ecosystem it's a natural force. It's a universal force to maintain the quality of an ecosystem. And guess what? Same thing applies to our organizations. But yet, getting back to this whole modern species that we've become, we have this mindset that we have to remove challenge and that we have to avoid challenge, and we want things to be easy.
Yeah.
But then we find ourselves when things are too easy, like just imagine having everything you could possibly want. Like, what are you going to do all day? Like, how long is it going to take for you to be like, I need to find a meaningful challenge. Like, I need to go do this hard thing.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's this paradox of we're trying to make life easy, but we need challenge. Like for millions of years, life was challenged for the human species. We are evolved to need challenge, to need meaningful challenge. And so bringing that to organizational ecology is, how do you approach challenge then in your organization or in your life? And sometimes there's challenges that we have to face, and just that we didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
We didn't choose them. We got to navigate them. And when you get to the other side of that, you've got to look at it from the perspective of, okay, I'm stronger now. And here's what I've learned from that. You know, the cliche of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger is cliche, but it's a universal force of nature. And so looking at it from that perspective, and then also the challenges that you get to choose. And those of us in this line of work, like we have chosen a pretty meaningful challenge. You know, we have chosen to maintain that which is natural, wild, and free, the way Aldo Leopold, he's from my hometown, by the way, the way he described the natural world, and the things that the Great Outdoors Foundation does, and just the work. I was listening to an earlier episode of your podcast, and talking about early on sending emails at 3 o'clock in the morning, being up all night working on things. Like I'm no stranger to that.
Definitely.
You know, that wasn't easy. You know, the things that any of us are dealing with now are not easy, but they're challenges worth accepting.
Yeah.
Nothing big ever happens generally because it was easy. You know, I give these talks and I'll ask the room, like, you know, who here has ever accomplished something you're proud of? And all the hands will go up. And then I'll say, okay, raise your hands again if that thing was easy. No hands go up.
Right. Exactly.
Like we accomplish hard things, and that's what we're proud of. But yet society wants us to avoid the hard things. And so that's the dynamic that, if we can bring that to our organizations, it's a communication thing. If we can frame these challenges that either we choose or that we're given as the prairie fires in our ecosystem, that's a very different mindset than just the defeatist or the victim mentality that oftentimes we tend to fall into.
Right. Well, and sort of if you take the illustration even a step further, it's ultimately what's most healthy for that ecosystem, right? So it's burning off the dead vegetation and adding nutrients into the soil, and to the earlier example, you know, freeing up the actual access to the sun, which is kind of amazing. I think with the tree clearing example, you know, you are giving the other plants and prairie access to sunlight, which they wouldn't have without the tree removal. So I think, you know, in your organizations, as you are going through these challenging experiences, looking at it as opportunity to remove or adjust the things that have maybe not been functioning well within the organization, and see those as net positives ultimately for the ecosystem.
Yeah. And a practical application. So going back to the early days of the podcast, I would talk to some of these directors, and they would say, you know, I took this job and I thought I'd be there a few years. And then we got this project going, and, you know, we made a little bit of headway on it. So I thought, I'll stick around a little bit longer. And then 35 years later,
right?
You know, you've got these incredible parks. I interviewed Ray Delmage, who was a park ranger. He and Tom Hazelton helped start the County Conservation Peace Officers Association, but he was a park ranger in Polk County before Jester Park was what Jester Park has become. And at the time, Jester Park was like every county has one of those parks, you know, where like back in the day, this is where the biker gangs would show up. This is where the keg parties would happen. He said one weekend, I think they confiscated like 13 kegs in a single night or something like that. And a board member came up to him and said,
fun time at Jester Park.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, at the time, a board member came up to him and said, we're going to clean this park and you're going to lead the charge. And you look at what Jester Park is now, you know, Ray is still around. He lives in my town, Burlington. So he's had the lifetime to see that thing go from that to what it is now. And there's these stories of these parks all over the state, all over the country that happen because those challenges, you know, like I'm sure it was not fun dealing with all those people and telling people, you know, no, you can't camp there. Like we have designated camping spots now, because it used to be people would just pull in and they would just park a camper wherever the heck they wanted to and be like, yeah, this is where I'm setting up for the weekend.
Exactly.
And, you know, and now it's this amazing place, and there's these stories all over the state like that, and so that's really that's the mindset that I'm trying to bring to more leaders, more organizations.
Yeah. And I think that segues so perfectly into our fifth and final concept, which is change is constant, right? We see that all over in the natural world, and certainly in any organization or sector. Change is about the only thing you can count on, right?
Exactly. And the flip side of that is doing nothing is a choice. Like just status quo is a choice. Like you can choose to just this is the way it is. This is the way it's always been done. But doing that generally isn't the optimal decision. And things are going to change anyway. And so you can either have things happen with or without your involvement.
Yeah.
And so that's where, the proactive part of the 5 Ps of a thriving organization come in of, change is happening. We can help steer that change a little bit, or we can bring the change, and we can light the prairie fire ourselves.
Yeah.
Or we could sit back and let that fuel load grow and grow and grow, and then wait for the wildfire to happen.
Yeah.
And I like that, but it is such a hard thing to do in an organization. I want to make this change, and despite the fact that we're wired, I said earlier, we're wired for challenge. We also have this innate fear of change. We like things that are consistent, and we like the status quo, and we like that which is comfortable and familiar.
Right.
But that's not how we move forward. And, and this is why I got to give Great Outdoors Foundation a lot of kudos, and this podcast, the Happy Disruptors, like it's kind of at the core of what you talk about here. It is, all right, we're going to disrupt this thing.
That's our hope.
Yeah. And, and so how do we then, as leaders in the parks and conservation world, how do we be part of that disruption and do it in such a way where it's a prescribed fire,
right,
and not a wildfire?
Absolutely. Yeah. I love that. It is something that if you can embrace it, and if you can, double down and make the best of the circumstances around you. I feel like that, kind of adding on to your concepts, but we see that all the time, and just the way species adapt, and the way that, all of the components of an ecosystem, they're constantly adapting to the conditions around them, and that we have to do the same thing. Yeah. Exactly.
And in terms of change, no one thing changes. Like everything is interconnected. Like that's kind of at the root of an ecosystem, right?
Right.
And so this idea of partnerships and working together and implementing change as a system rather than any one entity,
right,
trying to move this ball forward, that's a universal force of nature that I think we need to just be aware of and tap into as best we can.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, thank you so much for the conversation, Chris. We are going to jump into our final segment, everyone's favorite segment. Let's whiteboard it. So you have a whiteboard and marker next to you. Markers right there on the front. Yep, exactly. So our question for today's Let's Whiteboard It is, what is your favorite outdoor space in Iowa? Could be park, it could be hunting land, state park, county park. So you can either write or draw your answer on the board.
Absolutely.
Okay. While Chris is responding to the Let's Whiteboard It segment, make sure to like and subscribe wherever you are listening. Make sure to follow the Great Outdoors Foundation and the work that we're doing on all major social platforms. And then share this episode with someone who could benefit from learning about these leadership, ecology, organizational ecology lessons that Chris was so gracious to share with us today. So, have I given you enough time?
Yeah.
Oh, and you went for the drawing. I love it.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's see. So what's your favorite outdoor space?
All right. So it's a terrible drawing, but so it depicts the Mississippi River. So this little thing here is the river, and then there's this little tiny section. This is my my lot down by the river. So
love
the
it.
south end of Des Moines County, my family's been part of Burlington Sportsman's Club for a long time.
Yeah.
I inherited my share in the club from my grandfather.
Oh, wow.
It's about 300 acres of just bottomland forests right along the Mississippi River, and I got a little lot there. And so I'll bring my cabin down there, or bring my camper down there in the summer, build a little bonfire, and we take the kids, we go back and play in the woods. This place has been my happy place since I was a kid. And in fact, that place, more than anything else, is the reason I do what I do today.
Wow.
The experiences I had down there,
Yeah.
along that river, hunting and fishing, and just, you know, being the Huck Finn kind of kid that I was growing up, that absolutely is my happy place.
Yeah.
For sure.
And that's why we do what we do, right? So everybody else can have those experiences.
Yeah.
I love it.
You know, and I get to realize that in my line of work, and I have to remind myself this sometimes when I've spent several days digging in spreadsheets, you know, and you kind of lose the why for the what. I have to remind myself that very few people on earth have had this kind of experience or have this kind of experience. And we're becoming more and more urbanized. And so these parks and places that we create as parks and conservation people, or just the quality of the natural landscape around us that we are protecting, is critically important. And just like in wildlife management, I would work with these landowners, and they would do these habitat management things, and I would never see the results. You know, there's a good chance I would never step on that farm ever again. But I had to know that I made an impact.
Absolutely.
And sometimes we don't get to see the results of what we do, but we have to remember that they're there and remind ourselves, because it's real easy to get bogged down in the budgets and the spreadsheets and, you know, the hows and the whats, and we got to remember why we do this all the time.
Most definitely. Yeah. Great principle to end on. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.